One of the issues that I find people struggling with is the fact that they look at all these standards, but they don't understand the shifts that the Common Core is bringing. That they look at all these and they say, oh, we're already doing all that. Oh yeah, our state's got all kinds of standards. Oh, I've been dealing with standards my whole career. And how would you help them understand what shifts that the Common Core is making in classrooms?
I think first and foremost, evidence and text-dependent questions. Standard one, every grade, standard one is the evidence standard, and it calls for questions that can only be answered based on the text. An expression I like to use is, can the answer be found within the four corners of the text? If teachers start with that, that's clear, and that's a major shift. That could be done with text of any complexity level. And that can be done with text at any grade level, from kindergarten to grade 12. The next shift is to focus on academic language. Again, language meaning syntax and vocabulary. I've gone around the country and asked, how many of you teach syntax? And almost no one pays attention to syntax. How often do you take a sentence and ask the children to translate, not paraphrase, but translate? What does that sentence mean? Because that's a long sentence. Yet the research is clear. The two biggest predictors of student difficulty with complex text is uncommon vocabulary and complex syntax. And syntax is rarely addressed. And it can be addressed in second grade. You can read out loud. Alice in Wonderland has paragraphs that are one sentence long. You can put that on the smartboard and ask students to count the words in the sentence. Second graders love that. Sixth graders might say, we don't do math here, sorry. But second graders think, that's great, we're doing math here and reading. They get a kick out of that. But you start making kids aware of sentences and syntax right away in first or second grade. So that focus on academic language, syntax, and of course vocabulary. Start asking the kids to wrestle with difficult words. Don't give them all. Sometimes you have to give the meaning of a word. Even the SAT test sometimes provides the meaning of some words. But take a look at the words in the text you ask kids to read and ask them to determine the meaning of the word from context. So two shifts right away are text-dependent questions and a focus on academic language. The third shift is complex text, and admittedly that's more complex because you've got to support your weaker readers. When you're teaching fifth grade, when you're teaching the Declaration of Independence in eighth grade, you've got to come up with, as you do, a variety of systems to support kids who are reading at a third or fourth grade level. So those are your three shifts, but you can start right away with text-dependent questions and evidence, and teachers that I've spoken to seem to grab on to that.
With the text-dependent questions, it's amazing to look at some of the material that's out there, and even things that I've used in the past where you're asking students prompts and questions that have nothing to do with the text. And it has been enlightening for me with Common Core to just notice the difference in how once we have those text-dependent questions, we give kids access to the text and they have the same playing field that they're playing on now because everyone is reading the same thing and they all have the same experience, as opposed to reaching questions out of the sky saying, what do you think about it? And, to be honest, some of the kids will say, well, I don't care about it. How do you grade something like that?
Right,
but if it's based on the text, then that's something that really helps students to get the comprehension of what they're reading.
That's really important. I don't think people realize that text-based questions are an equity issue. They level the playing field.
If it's not in the text, what you're counting on is their background information they're walking into the classroom with. And if they don't have the background information on the War of 1812, if they don't have something that they're walking in there into the classroom with, and you go outside of the text, too often you're really putting those kids at a disadvantage who have no background knowledge, or maybe they come from a home that doesn't speak English proficiently, or they're coming from a situation that they don't get as much of that background built in, and making it dependent on the text makes it equitable.
That's so true. I think you can almost put in one sentence what the standards are designed to do. Have students leave the 12th grade who can learn independently from complex text. Because if you can learn independently from complex text, you succeed in career and you succeed in college. If you're asking kids to analyze a complex text, Declaration of Independence, James Joyce, Harriet Tubman, then the more time they spend outside the text, the less time they're going to be devoting to analyzing that complex text. But then a question does arise that, and what I do is I pose the question in workshops with teachers. I said, all right, so you're reading about a child whose older sibling was killed in Afghanistan. And you have 3 kids in your class who have older siblings in Afghanistan. They're never going to talk about their response to this text. They're never going to talk about what this makes them worry about with their brother who's in Kandahar now. You can't do that. That makes no sense. However, have those discussions after the text has been thoroughly analyzed. And there's two primary reasons for that. One, if the students have thoroughly analyzed the text, their own personal response is going to be more meaningful than rather if you infuse that personal response during, if not before, the analysis of the text. So the child who speaks out about their response, if they've really absorbed that text, is likely to have a richer response. So that's one reason for leaving it to the end. The other reason for leaving it to the end is it's easier to talk about ourselves than it is to analyze a text. That's true for us too. We'd rather talk about ourselves than analyze text. I think the way David Coleman puts it is self-love is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't necessarily make better readers. And if you open that up to talking about yourself during the analysis of the text, it's gonna just flood the discussion.
One thing, another shift with the academic vocabulary, and I can't remember which video it was, but you were talking about the word say, S-A-Y. It's such a short word, but in the example that it was used in the text, what does that word mean? So when we talk about the shift of academic vocabulary, although, again, that's not a tier 3 word or anything like that, but having students really understand what those words mean in the context of which it's given, that's very important as well.
Would you give us a definition of tier 1 and 2 and 3?
Tier 1 words are words learned in everyday discourse. Couch, family, television. It's easier to say what tier 3 words are. They're words specific to the domain. So in science, protoplasm, membrane, vascular would be tier 3 words. In social studies, legislature, boundary, continent would be tier 3 words. Tier 2 words, which the standards refers to as academic words, are words that could appear in any type of text. Relative, variable, pernicious, sincere, urgent. They could appear in social studies texts, science texts, or literacy texts. They're privileged by the standards for just that reason, that they could appear in any type of text. We've been taught that success as teachers means how smooth we make the road for students. What you're saying is we need to make the road bumpier, and that's what we need to look for. And that's absolutely true. And that's a huge difference.